Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Name's Duncan McCall. So yeah, as you heard, I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called PlaceIQ. What I'm going to talk to you today about is I'm going to give you a very, very quick overview in terms of, so what does PlaceIQ do, to sort of give you a grounding in that. And I'm actually going to step through a couple of stories from the data. So really, what can you learn from this idea of movement and location data? And I'll step you through a couple of kind of data stories, if you will. So firstly, the purpose of this slide is not to talk about the company, but just to say we focused on one thing and one thing only for 7 years, and that is making sense of location and movement data. And if you say, well, what does that mean? We basically ingest and build a very large amount of spatial data in the world, so we understand what's in the world, what does it mean to be in a certain place at a certain time, and then we intersect that with the movement of about 165 million opted-in consumers in the US who are moving around, sharing their location through smartphones. And the output of that is what we call this new model of consumer behavior. And if you say, well, what's the new model of consumer behavior? At the center here, you obviously have a smartphone. And as we all know, without going into any cliches, smartphones are really the first wearable, right? We all have one. They're with us all the time. They truly are connecting the physical and digital space. And what we do is we essentially look at opted-in, firstly, movement data from these devices. So what does that mean? That means these devices are sharing their location. And for those of you who are, kind of knowledgeable about this space, there's two ways that can happen. One is what is known as foreground location, meaning you only see a consumer when they have an application out on their phone and they're using it. And the other type is background location data, meaning you see that anonymous consumer all the time. We take those two data sets, and we can now see from location, where are those anonymous consumers visiting brands, spending their time, what competitive brands? Are they driving past certain types of areas? How far will they drive in Texas versus Maine to go to a certain type of retail, or what kind of lifestyle, recreation activities, hobbies? And then we connect this data to what we call third-party data. So this isn't just about movement data in the world where we've built thousands of audiences. It's about connecting it to auto ownership data, to television viewership data, retail purchase data. So if you think of your mobile device that is connected to the internet and connected to your digital identity, it's also connected to the physical world through the circuitry and the sensors in that device. And it turns out now you can connect third-party data to physical behavior in the world. So you can start to say, of all the consumers that have recently visited an automotive dealership, are they actually in market for a car or not? What type of car? Everybody who's watching the Golf Channel on television, do they actually play golf? Or maybe they actually just like to watch golf on TV and they play tennis. And then we connect this to what we call first-party data. So first-party data being the idea of a brand or an advertiser's data, so their website visitation, their CRM, their data management platform, their loyalty app. So now you can start to see, okay, I'm an automotive OEM, and I've got people who registered their vehicles with me. I've got people visiting my website. Well, we can connect those identities through to third-party data, but really importantly, through to their behaviors in the world. Did they visit a car dealership? What kind of attributes do they have behaviorally in the world? So in our world, that is this new model of consumer behavior. You can create segments to target. You can measure foot traffic. But most importantly, you can analyze and understand consumer behavior in a new way. And if you say, well, where can you sort of deploy this, or what platforms are relevant? This isn't just mobile data. We think about these new types of data now that they're truly omni-channel, right? They're not data about a mobile device. They're data about a consumer that you can apply across social, video, display. You can take this data and push it into television. So you can you can build an audience of people in the world who have a certain behavior. And because the mobile device provides this connective tissue through to television, you can now actually buy TV based upon behaviors in the world. And you can say, everybody who saw my ad on television, did they actually visit my location, et cetera? And you could even go as far as out of home and site selection. So that's a very quick, so that's what, my company and other companies do. And if you say, where is all this stuff going, right? This world we live in with all of this data. So we kind of started out with this world of proximity marketing and the idea of, this mythical sort of idea of a Starbucks coupon. Was a device near a Starbucks, and if they were, show them an ad for a Starbucks coupon, which of course never really happened. And then you had this world of, well, now I can take everybody who goes to Starbucks, everybody goes to McDonald's, and I can build an audience based upon their historical behaviors. And that kind of evolved into, if I show someone an advertisement for a Hilton hotel and their mobile device that saw that ad ended up at a Hilton hotel, that's a form of attribution. And what I really want to talk to you today about is this kind of new world that we've really, focused on, which is what are the analytical opportunities and outputs of this fact that we're all now a huge mass of sensors moving around the world, and every day you can dynamically understand where are people going, how often are they going there, what are the places are they visiting, how far do they drive. So, if you think about, well, what's the real asset of connecting location and mobile? You've got this concept of people connected to places, connected to things, and that kind of provides this framework to analyze and understand. And we built this new system where we've taken all of this data, we've put it into a very large, expensive in-memory analytics database. We update it every day, and you can actually query this system. So the whole live system, it wasn't really logistically sensible to demo it, so I took a bunch of screenshots and they annotated them, and I want to step you through a couple of stories from the data. And the first thing is this idea of looking back to Q4 last year. We work with a lot of retailers and saying, what happened in big box retail last year based upon the data that we see from the movement of mobile devices. And where I'm going to start is, this is literally a screen from our system called Landmark, where you can go in and you can say, show me Walmart, Costco, and Target, Sam's Club, Q4, and show me their foot traffic. So we'll start with Costco, right? We're all familiar with these brands. So let's take Costco, and I just screenshotted a graph here, and you can literally see, you can see the dates. This screen's fantastic, so you can see all the detail. This is daily foot traffic into Costco's. And for those of you who are close enough to read, right, you can see some obvious things here. This is Thanksgiving. And for those of you who don't know, right next to Matt there. Costco is actually closed on Thanksgiving. They have a very different Thanksgiving strategy to others. So you see that very clearly in the data. This, of course, is the day before Christmas, which I didn't know, but is actually a busier foot traffic shopping day than Black Friday, which is traditionally one of the busiest days. So, okay, that's moderately interesting. Let's layer on Target. So we throw on Target here compared to Costco. And, you see quite a different trend here, right? Because guess what? Target is actually open on Thanksgiving. So we see that very clearly here. And obviously we see we're looking at raw foot traffic here, right? So this is the count of foot traffic based upon 165 million mobile devices that we see into these brands. And these are nice, big, clear spatial structures. You get a strong read. So suddenly you see, okay, we can see Thanksgiving and Christmas very easily. So now let's layer on, the granddaddy of U.S. retail, Walmart. Well, how does this look? And of course, unsurprisingly there you see Walmart is just crushing everybody in foot traffic for Q4. You didn't need us to tell you that. And you can see, of course, they, as we all know, have these incredible doorbusters, and they really promote the heck out of Black Friday. A ton of foot traffic the day before Christmas for these guys is incredibly strong. So, this is interesting data, but this hasn't told you anything you didn't already know, really. So now you can start to say, well, let's throw in one extra one here. Let's throw in Kmart. And Kmart, we know, is a bit of a sad story. So we can see, boy, they are literally flatlining on here. So just hold that thought for a while. But you think, boy, that's we kind of knew that as well. So let's look at this data in a different way, because you've got to remember, Walmart has more stores than anybody else. So they're going to have more foot traffic. So what about if you said, let's look at all the visits to these stores and divide them by the number of stores, so we can look at relative busyness per store. So this is an analytical thing we've had for a long time. So let's look at traffic per store. And we look at Walmart, and great, it is what it is. Now let's layer over that Target. And you can now see, well, that's interesting. In terms of business per store, Target is actually, doing pretty well against Walmart on Black Friday. No great surprise there. But what happens if we add in Costco here? You start to see something very interesting, right? So now you see, look at this. So we see now Costco versus Walmart. They're actually neck and neck in terms of busyness. And because you're a data-driven crowd, I'll point out that we have not normalized for the square footage of the stores here. So Walmart stores are typically larger. But you're looking here at the fact that these stores are pretty darn busy. But what you now see is, you see at Christmas, day before Christmas here, that all these guys are pretty much neck and neck. Well, certainly Walmart and Costco are kind of neck and neck here. But the really interesting thing is if you look at this data here, you can start to see a very interesting trend, which is on Black Friday, we can actually see they're all pretty much neck and neck. But the time before Black Friday, Costco is just crushing everybody with business per store. Now, we work with a lot of these brands, and we're lucky enough to sit down with the CMOs and talk through this. We're like, well, what is happening here? Why is Costco so busy? And of course, what's happening is Costco is driving everybody into the store before Thanksgiving. Everybody goes there to buy their consumables, right? That day there is probably chaos, right? And there's all the people who haven't bought the turkeys and all the trimmings. They're all running into Costco. It's absolute madness. And this is very frustrating for the likes of Walmart, who have spent a huge amount of money stocking up on fresh food and organic food, but really aren't thought of as a place to be able to get food beforehand. They're so focused on Black Friday. So suddenly in this data, we're able to see that Costco has a completely different strategy against Walmart versus Target. And then, of course, if you throw in Kmart on the bottom there, you now start to see, we kind of hope that, as you know, they've closed a bunch of Kmarts, so maybe they just closed the Kmarts that are not doing well. But sadly enough, these Kmarts aren't busy either, right? So you can now look into this data and you can start to understand the brands that are struggling, the brands that are doing well. You can see foot traffic. You can see how people are driving trends. So if you think about this on a national basis, it's one thing. But suddenly now say, well, what about if we were to look at business per store by DMA? So this is actually Walmart. This is all straight off our system. Walmart is the kind of cyan color here. So what you can see is we've now looked at every single DMA. We've looked at business per store. So now you can start to see over here, these are all of the Walmarts and the DMAs where they are busier than their competition. So anything below the Walmart line, the stores are less busy. So Walmart's doing great, right? But now as you start to go further down here, you can start to see here are all the Costcos, the DMAs that Costco's exist in, where they're busier. So suddenly you can imagine, you can look right at the end here where Target's competing. So you can imagine the power of this data for retailers to start to understand. They know how they're doing. They have no idea how they are relatively performing against their competition. So suddenly, you think about, well, what's the learning from this story, right? You can start to think about holiday. You can start to think about, we can see national trends, but national trends are not indicative of individual store brand health. And this idea of movement and location data provides an incredibly powerful way to understand, to view into real foot traffic, census-based understanding that is not just, here's some insights, but are actually actionable, because behind each one of these dots on that previous chart, each one of these dots represents an individual set of individual consumers that if you so choose, you can market to, you can message to, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really the first story in this data. And then quickly, the second story I wanted to tell you. I was in Europe last week, and I was presenting at this conference called ICOM, which is a very, very data-centric crowd. Its conference stands for the International Conference on Measurement. And it's all the heads of the agencies and the heads of brands who are focused on research and analytics. And I was giving a presentation, and I thought, I want to tell a story with the data that's maybe a little bit more interesting. And this is a very diverse crowd. It's only about 50% Americans. So I did this set of slides, and I said, I found something in the data, and I want to call it seasonal migratory behavior in the coastal U.S. And I want to explain it to you guys. So we'll see how this goes down with you. So some of you will figure this out pretty quickly. But I went in a system, and literally, I was going to give the presentation you just saw. I went in our system and said, I wonder if I can find something a bit more entertaining. So I want to look for this migratory behavior, and I'm going to find this migratory behavior, I think, in this place called Panama City, Florida. I went into Panama City, Florida, and I said, show me some QSR and bars and see if we can find this behavior. And the first thing I looked at was foot traffic to the supermarket brand you're probably all familiar with, called Publix. And here's all the real data from our system. And you can see spikes on various weekends. And the first thing I said, well, what the hell is that spike there? That's when Super Bowl is. So here are all the people running into Publix, buying all the stuff for Super Bowl. And then if you look at the right-hand side here, we're looking January all the way through to the end of March. You look at this massive anomaly here, and you're like, well, what the hell is that? Well, this is this migratory behavior that I was talking about, which is spring break, right? And of course, I was in a room full of Europeans. I'm trying to explain spring break, and I'm obviously not a native of this country, so I go online, and spring break, involves people standing on the beach and taking pictures of themselves, waving at people on stages, followed by the drinking of alcohol through what appears to be gardening tools. So that was my explanation for all these Europeans of what spring break was, but I was saying, look, this is where everybody takes off holiday and they go to these areas. So we can see that Publix, the supermarket, had been heavily affected by spring break. So I pulled a couple of other data sets, and I said, I wonder what the effect of spring break is on these other categories. So Chick-fil-A, good, very American brand for chicken sandwiches. Let's look at foot traffic in the same town for Chick-fil-A. And of course, the fascinating thing about Chick-fil-A is this idea that it's closed every Sunday, right? As you know, the founder's very religious, so we can see there's some really interesting peaks in the data. But then again, on the right-hand side, you see, you see they get a nice bump from spring break. So the next thing I thought was, what about IHOP? So I remember the days when I used to come to the States, and if you go out drinking, you drink all night, and then you go for pancakes in the morning. So this is going to be a no-brainer to find a good spring break story. So I pulled that up. And interestingly enough, I was completely wrong. Turns out IHOP is no longer hit with spring break people, right? It's just completely flat there. So I said, okay, well, I guess that's kind of interesting. So the next thing I pulled up was, what about Buffalo Wild Wings? This is going to be a no-brainer. It's sports, it's alcohol. They're all over the place in Florida. So let's look at this. And sure enough, Buffalo Wild Wings gets a huge bump from spring break. But again, we're only looking at raw foot traffic here. So I said, well, what about if we look at the share of visit? So what is the actual share of visit to these different establishments? And what you can see, it gets very interesting. So look at the gray. IHOP is just cruising along, right? These are just old people avoiding spring break, eating pancakes. They don't want anything to do with anyone else. Chick-fil-A is doing really well. But as spring break gets busier and busier, more of that business is actually taken by Buffalo Wild Wings. So actually, Buffalo Wild Wings is capitalizing in a much greater way on spring break. So I thought, boy, that's really interesting. And then finally, what about if we look at traffic per store? Because there's clearly more Chick-fil-A's than there is Buffalo Wild Wings. That's going to tell us how actually busy these stores are. So we look at this and we plot this in the system. And I'm like, well, this is a great story. Look at it. Buffalo Wild Wings is just killing it during spring break. So these places are probably insane. And I'm thinking, well, this is a great story. And then I see this spike, and I'm like, oh, God, what the hell is that? I can't put up a slide, and have that strange anomaly there. So I look at the date, and that's yet another American sporting event. That's the basketball championships, which, of course, is driving a ton of people in. So finally, you think about, well, what are the takeaways from this? And, presenting to this European crowd, my obvious conclusion was the American economy is completely dependent on holidays, food, and sports. But of course, that, the real takeaway is, look, this idea of location and mobile, location-based marketing, people think of it as proximity marketing and very basic. It's really evolving now, right, to this massively new opportunity of observing this new understanding of consumer behavior on a tremendous scale. That really allows enterprises, organizations, community planning, a whole new set of applications to really leverage this data across an increasing number of use cases. So really, that was my talk about what we do at PlaceIQ and how we're super excited about the future of data-driven understanding and marketing from location and mobile. So thanks very much.
Thank you. This was awesome. We ate a little bit of the Q&A time, so I'll open up for one or two, ideally people who haven't asked questions before. Tony? Not tonight.
Excellent talk. I'm going to drill down on a question I asked you briefly before, but actually I have two questions. One is that mobile data just seems to be like a gold mine. How do you get how do you get access to that? And the other thing is also, if it's so available, how do you as a company differentiate from others that could also get access to this data?
Yeah. So look, the quick answer to that is access to data is actually almost commodified already, right? The idea of movement data and location data, those are data sets that exist out there. They used to be very hard to get. We spent many years scrapping away. Now there's a marketplace for them. But you got to remember that the challenge here is if you get location data and movement data, you have to fuse them in a logical format to make sense. A visitation to a McDonald's in the suburbs that has a nice clear spatial structure in a car park versus one in a city is very, very different. These devices are inherently inaccurate up to 30 or 40 meters. There's tremendous challenges with the data. So it's not the data itself. It's the application to make sense of that data and then the use cases out the back. That's where we really focus.
Great. One more.
Yeah, I have a question about, so you're getting data from mobile phones. Do you know who exactly that data is coming from? Like, what demographics do you know about those people, and how does that play into your analysis?
Yeah, so we made a conscious decision many years ago not to hold any PII, not to hold any personally identifiable information. So and one of the great things that happened in the ecosystem was when Apple deprecated UDID. The UDID was the hardware identifier for a phone that was considered privacy unfriendly, and they put a software identifier on the top called advertiser ID. Consumers can turn off. So now we have an identifier that's persistent, that the consumers control, and that's the core identifier we use. We connect that to lots of other data sets, but ultimately the data that we have is anonymized, and we don't try and identify a consumer. However, in that first slide, if you want to bridge this in, if you're Ford, you say, I want to bridge this data into my CRM system, we can go through a live ramp, we can go through our own data match, and you can connect it to your own PII, and you can make sense of it. But we do not hold PII on any of these devices. We don't try and identify them, don't know their phone numbers, who they are, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll take one last question, but I have to notice from this angle that you actually have some PlaceIQ socks.
Sorry.
Which is very...
We do monetize in the marketing ecosystem, so there are all sorts of giveaways. I felt appropriate that I at least wear the PlaceIQ socks tonight, so we'll sort you out with a pair.
Oh, thank you.
Are you working on data prediction, and do you have some specific model based on your own model?
Yeah, so we shy away from the sort of predictive, from talking about predictive. So I'll give you like one of the obvious applications we have. For example, it comes back to marketing. Is take QSR. So something like quick service restaurant, typically a very impulse-based purchase, right? People don't get up in the morning and say, I'm planning to have McDonald's for dinner tonight. Well, most people don't. Lots of people end up there somehow. So you end up in the journey, you come out drunk, you're coming out of work late. So it's very impulse-based. So what we do, in specific example to answer your question, we can look at all the devices who ended up going to McDonald's in a certain DMA and a certain zip codes, and we can say, what were those anonymous devices doing before they came there? And how did that change based upon time of day, weather, events? And we can now build a prediction, if you will, of there's a very high chance someone comes out of work on a Tuesday night late, white-collar work in Manhattan, they may have the opportunity to be, impulsed off into buying QSR. So we do this thing called pre-visit, whereby we sort of do predictive analytics, and we use that for marketing. But we don't pretend that we are going to predict massive consumer behavior on a huge scale. But where we do those types of things, we've typically been very successful, and especially in examples where they're more impulse-based, and it's easy to sort of convert people off.
Great. Thank you very much, Duncan.
Thanks so much.